Hello, welcome back to the Jam Sesh podcast. I know it's been quite some time since the last episode. I didn't mean to take a pause in between a two-part series, but I'm back and today we are resuming the discussion about Smells Like Teen Spirit. So in the last episode, if you haven't seen that, I basically go over the musical components that make this song so special and contribute to why it was such a big hit at the time and still is such a popular song now. So today I'm going to go over more like the cultural and societal components that were in place when the song came out that contributed to it being as popular as it was in the 90s amongst the Gen X youth. And that's basically what put Nirvana and grunge music in general on the map. So I anticipate this is going to be a long episode, so I guess let's start. So, Smells Like Teen Spirit is basically known as the Gen X anthem. And Gen X was like the generation born in like the late 60s and the 70s. Like if you're a Gen Z, then your parents are most likely Gen X. So they came of age in like the 80s and 90s, and this is their anthem. And I'll go into that in more detail later on. So this song, as I talked about in the previous episode, is an amazing work of art. It's really, really good musically, but there's also an element of happenstance that leads to something becoming really popular. And this song just came at the right place at the right time. Like it was exactly what Gen X needed in the time that it came out. In addition to that, a lot of its popularity can be attributed to its heavy rotation on MTV. From what I read, apparently this song was being played like every few hours on MTV. If you ever watched MTV in the early 90s, there's a very good chance that you've seen this music video. And the story of how this music video made it onto MTV is also pretty interesting. And I might make an episode on that at some point, because the video got rejected at first, and someone at MTV really pushed for it to be put on there. So I think at some point I'll make another episode on that. But for now, we're gonna go into like a little bit of a history lesson. I think it's important to go over Gen X's upbringing in America. All the history I'm going to be talking about today is American history. So it's important to know the cultural and historical and political issues that were going on at the time, because that's the kind of thing that informs people's thoughts and opinions and attitudes, which in turn influences the art and music that comes out at that time. Gen X grew up in a very different environment from their parents, the baby boomers, and some silent gens as well. I'm sure you know that the 50s was considered like America's golden age. Like it was right after the World War, and America had been doing so well economically, and all this new technology and innovation was happening. And I do want to but I do want to disclaim that when people go back, talk about how good things were in the 50s, it wasn't as good for minorities at the time. So the golden 50s weren't golden for everyone, but that is what this decade is referred to in America. So the people who had experienced the 50s, the golden 50s, were mainly the greatest and silent generation, who are also the ones who primarily fought in the war. Once everyone came back from war and America was having all this economic and technological prosperity, people had a lot of babies at the time, hence baby boom. So there was a lot of steady job growth, a lot of affordable housing, a lot of the new technology created a lot of new jobs. There's a lot of economic prosperity at this time. And whenever there's economic prosperity, people tend to have more kids. And not only did people have more kids, but the whole family life kind of changed a lot, and suburban living became a huge thing. A lot of people were moving away from cities into suburbs, more suburbs were being built, and people would commute and drive their car to work every day. And you know, like the stereotypical like 2.5 kids, a white picket fence, and a dog kind of thing. You know, the American dream or whatever. And life just became a lot more family oriented, which makes sense now that this family unit was kind of taken away from the big city and kind of became its own thing. Like I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of technological growth and economic prosperity at this time. So naturally, As a result, consumerism increased. So people were shopping a lot more. People were making a lot more money and people were buying a lot more things. People were owning a lot more things just to own it. You know, this was the start of this whole like you are what you own sort of attitude. Like people were defined by how many things they own, what types of things they own, what sorts of brands they could afford, and there was some sort of status and prestige in owning certain amounts of things or certain types of things. Before, people would only buy stuff when something broke or ran out, and now people were buying stuff just to have it, you know? And another theme that was going on in this time, like I mentioned, the family system changed a lot. Suburban living became a thing. And also while it sucked overall, wars are great for the feminist movement. So a lot of women took over men's jobs when the men went to war. And it created this sort of confidence, like, hey, we can do it. You know that poster of that woman was flexing and she's like, we can do it, yeah. Anyways, that's from World War II. I'm sure you already know all this history, but I just wanted to go over it because I want to illustrate what things were like before Gen X were born, so I can contrast it with the type of environment that Gen X grew up in. Now that the war was over, the men came back and took back their jobs, and then the women kind of became housewives. Like the men would go to work, the women would stay at home and cook and clean and take care of the kids and manage the household. And that was just the norm, that was the expectation. Women didn't really work unless they had to. A reversion of traditional gender roles, basically. And then there's also the GI Bill that was passed, where basically anyone who fought in the war could get an education for free, higher education for free. So that led to a lot more people being educated. And then in addition, education became cheaper in general. And so a lot more people were college educated than had ever been before that point. And in general, just a lot more commercial innovation. Like this is the era where that American capitalism was born. So many big, recognizable, multi-million-dollar brands were built during this era. Just to name a few: McDonald's, Walmart, Disney, Nike, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson. These all started around that time. So basically just tons of capitalism and consumerism, and this was just the beginning of it. So the cons of capitalism hadn't set in yet because it hadn't been going on for very long. So it was just like blissful, happy, everyone was rich, everyone had money, everyone had lots of things. There was lots more good food to eat and a lot more entertainment and recreation and things to buy and places to go and things to do. It was just an immense world of abundance after having to like ration after World War II. That was kind of the era that the greatest generation and the silent generation were experiencing in the 50s, and that was the kind of society that baby boomers were born into. But then a change happened. So what happened when baby boomers grew up and came of age? As is typical teenage fashion, when you reach that age, you become rebellious and you want to challenge the older people's way of thinking. You want to rebel against your parents' way of thinking. And you want to challenge societal norms of the time. And hence the countercultural movement was born. So they wanted to challenge a lot of the values of their parents' generation, like materialism and conformity that they grew up with. You see this happen all the time. Like trends and cultural movements always oscillate. Like something will be really popular and then the opposite will be popular and then it'll come back and so on. So like nothing is forever. So if one thing is trendy, the exact opposite will be trendy like the following decade and so on. So naturally, teenagers usually want to do the opposite of what their parents are doing. And so a lot of them became hippies. And there were a lot of political and societal things going on at the time that also contributed to this. Baby boomers coming of age was influenced by the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, and then birth control became a thing, which led to a sexual revolution and the second wave feminism. And then there was this whole hippie psychedelic culture as well. So these are the kinds of things that baby boomers came of age with. Another big shift that changed for baby boomers is that marriage and family values shifted and changed a lot, and marriage became a lot less of a priority than it used to be. And so there's this thing called gray divorce, which is basically like, for baby boomers, they have the highest highest divorce rate in American history. Because so many people got married because that's what they're expected to do. But then a lot of people were questioning, like, why do we have to get married? And, like I said earlier, the sexual revolution made it so that people didn't want to commit as much. Personal fulfillment became more of a priority. Like, I don't exist for my family, I exist for myself kind of thing. Like, that very individualistic American culture was becoming really popular at the time. And then there were also no-fault divorce laws that were passed at the time, which made divorce skyrocket, because before you had to prove that someone did something wrong, and that's why you were getting a divorce. But this law made it so that anyone can get a divorce for any reason, and there doesn't necessarily have to be any blame attributed to anyone. And another value that shifted around marriage was people were marrying for love rather than practicality. So it was basically like, you marry someone from a similar culture and socioeconomic status, and you see how your lifestyles and personalities would fit together. It was more about compatibility and practicality. But then baby boomer generation kind of ditched that and married for love. And that led to a lot more divorce, because sometimes when you marry for love, your emotions get in the way of your logic, and you marry someone who might not necessarily be the best partner for you, or someone that you're not necessarily compatible with. Like, just because you're in love with someone doesn't mean you'll necessarily have a successful relationship with them. There's lots of other factors that contribute to a successful relationship other than just being in love. And then things were also changing for women. So like I said earlier, after the war, there was a shift back to traditional gender roles. But then around the 60s or so, The Feminine Mystique was published, which was basically about how being a housewife is not fulfilling to most women. That book took the nation by storm. A lot of women were realizing, like, why do I have to be forced to be inside the house? Why can't I pursue a career if I want to? People get fulfillment from contributing to society. And more importantly, when you are a stay-at-home mom, you're existing for other people. You're cooking for your husband and children and cleaning for them and just doing things for them, and you're not doing stuff for yourself as much. A lot of women were like, screw this, I want to work. I don't want my life to just be about marriage and kids and that's all. So a lot more women joined the workforce, and that resulted in a lot more financial independence for women, which means that, again, they didn't have to marry for money. They could marry for love, or they didn't have to marry at all, some of them, if they made enough money, which probably not many did at the time. But if she had some family money in addition to that, then maybe she could have the option not to get married. And like I said earlier, while the 50s had great economic prosperity, after that, everything kind of got messed up. And there was a lot of economic instability. For example, the government, because they wanted to control inflation, they raised interest rates, which led to the 1980s recession. There was high unemployment and stagflation, which basically means high inflation with stagnating economic growth. Then there's the 1990s recession, and that was caused by the collapse of the savings and loan industry. Economic fallout after the Gulf War. So this led to a lot of layoffs in the 90s and a lot of unemployment. There was a lot of deindustrialization as well. So, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was the Industrial Revolution, where people were using machines to do everything. You didn't have to do stuff by hand as much. And factories became really popular, and that led to so many jobs. But then later on, in the second half of the century, most jobs were not about physical things, but about digital things. There's a big shift from manufacturing jobs to service jobs in the 80s and 90s. There were lower wages, fewer benefits, less job security, which led to more temporary and gig work, which leads to job and financial instability, and you don't have benefits or retirement plans. So the workforce was changing a lot. Before, it was like you get a job straight out of high school or college, and then you work at that job till you retire, and then you die. But things were changing now. People would have a lot more careers and a lot more jobs, and sometimes people would be doing a lot of gig work, which nowadays we call freelance work. Typical employment wasn't as the path for everyone anymore. Plus, globalization led to the outsourcing of lots of jobs as well to other countries. And then there's also increased demand in education, because the more educated you are, the more money you can make. But because there is so much demand, they also increased the prices. So now education became a lot more expensive than it was in the 50s, especially considering because of deindustrialization, unskilled labor was not as high paying as it used to be. Now you had to get an education and have more intellectual skills rather than physical skills, which also increased the demand in education, which increased its cost. And now a college degree is insanely expensive and doesn't even necessarily guarantee a job, which is kind of crazy. There's also the 1973 oil crisis, which caused global economic disruptions. In general, all of these economic issues led to an increasing disparity between the rich and the poor as well, the haves and the have-nots. And whenever there's a big disparity like that, there's also a lot more resentment as well. And if that's not enough, there are also issues in the environment at the time too, I'm sure you know. So no one had really been paying attention to the environment before this, but in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson's Scientific Advisory Committee released reports on the dangers of carbon dioxide accumulation in the atmosphere from fossil fuel burning. As I mentioned earlier, in the 50s there was tons of consumerism. And no one thought, oh, the planet will get hotter because of this. This is bad for the environment. We're using our limited natural resources. Like, mass consumerism was never a thing before, so no one really thought about or considered the impacts of it. And people were having such a good time, and they're having so much fun consuming all this stuff, so they didn't want to ruin it by looking at the negative sides of it. But you can only avoid reality for so long. All the deforestation to create suburbs and fossil fuel consumptions that were used in a lot of plastic and material objects that were being mass produced. This all led to higher levels of air pollution, water pollution, plastic use, just general. And the thing is, now there's a lot more regulations in place when it comes to environmental factors. But at the time, this was also new, so the laws were not keeping up with technology. And even nowadays, technology evolves so fast, and laws take a really long time to get into place. So there's this period of time in between the technology evolving and the laws being created where there's just all this chaos and freedom and power without responsibility. So because there were no clear laws about environmental things yet, corporations could do pretty much whatever they wanted at the time, and no one could say anything. After the golden 50s, there were also a lot of changes in technology, and a big theme is there's a switch from analog to digital thing. This is the first time in human civilization that not everything was analog anymore. Not everything was in the real material physical world. Now there's a digital world as well. Things like computers became a thing. And a lot of jobs that used to be done by people were now outsourced to computers. And same for social interaction. For example, arcade games became a big thing in the 80s, and then video games became a big thing in the 90s. So kids would stay in and just play those games instead of being out and socializing. Do these themes sound familiar at all? It's kind of like Gen Z is going through a very similar thing. I feel like history just keeps repeating itself. Automation became a huge thing, so they were able to do a lot of intellectual things that before only people could do. The Industrial Revolution outsourced a lot of physical labor, and then the Technological Revolution outsourced a lot of intellectual labor. There were a lot of changes in family life as well, and I talked about this a little bit when I was going over the Grey Divorce thing. But yeah, so as a result of the Grey Divorce, the traditional nuclear family format fell apart, and the highest divorce rates in the country were in the 1970s and 80s, which was when the Gen X were children, and baby boomers were the ones getting divorced. So a lot of blended and non-traditional family structures became a thing. Single parents and step-parents, even mixed-race families became a lot more socially acceptable as well. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, because women read the feminine mystique and were like, I want to go do stuff that I want to do. A lot more women were working, and because the divorce rates were so high, if a woman did get divorced and didn't immediately get remarried, she would have to work in the meantime. So a lot more women were working, which means both parents were working, which means there were a lot of latchkey kids. And Gen X is known as the latchkey generation because they were the first generation to grow up without anyone else in the house. Like, both parents were at work, so they would just come home from school to an empty house every day, and their parents wouldn't come back until the evening. And I will get more into the latchkey kid thing later. So last change I want to talk about, while baby boomers were coming of age and Gen X were children, basically the post-50s world, is the political changes. So the Cold War created a lot of political tension. And there's the Vietnam War, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of Gen Xers had parents who fought in the Vietnam War. There's the Watergate scandal in the 80s, which led to a widespread distrust of government institutions. And keep this theme in mind because we will revisit it later on, this whole distrust in institutions idea. And then there was the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, which marked the end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union and communism. And basically, this was a physical representation that no regime can last forever. Like, think about it. When it was the 50s, America was like number one, on top of the world. Like, we're unstoppable, we're the best, no one can beat us. And then when a powerful civilization such as the Soviet Union just crumbles, it kind of disillusions you, or it kind of changes the way you think about these things. Like, oh, no country will last forever, no regime will last forever. Like, these things are very impermanent, very temporary. And again, that connects to the idea of generally not taking institutions very seriously. There's also a rise in conservative politics, and the Reagan presidency promoted deregulation, tax cuts, and a shift towards free market policies. Say what you will about Reagan, but we do have him to thank for a lot of really good punk music. A lot of punk music made in the 80s was inspired by Reagan's presidency. At least we got some good music out of it. Okay, so now we went over the environment that baby boomers were born into, and then we went over the environment that baby boomers came of age in and Gen X were born into. And now we're going to talk about Gen X's coming of age. So now I've set the stage of like what was going on in America at the time. Now we're talking about Gen X growing up, and these themes directly correlate with Smells Like Teen Spirit. The big theme in the Gen X upbringing was this whole collapse of traditional structures and institutions. So like I said, the thing about the Berlin Wall showed that no regime can last forever. Things like the Watergate scandal showed like you can't always trust the government. Then there's a lot of economic stability. So it's like, oh, things used to be so good economically. Now they're all messed up. There's a lot of instability. So even economically, things are not always stable. And then the fall apart of the traditional nuclear family structure, you know, parents getting divorced and having to work a lot. So a general theme is a collapse of traditional institutions. And that's the kind of environment that Gen X grew up in. Like, whatever was traditional and standard and normal for baby boomers, it kind of all fell apart when Gen X was growing up. Basically, the cracks were showing after the 1950s. It's like, how long can you have this era of prosperity? Like, the party can't last forever, you know? So all this political and economic turmoil, which in turn leads to internal, like, family turmoil, and it led to feelings of distrust and instability and chaos. So naturally, what happens when all these systems that you thought you could trust just fall apart? What happens to you psychologically? It creates feelings of wanting to rebel and value individualism and things that are self-serving. And it makes you feel nihilistic. Like, what's the point of anything? You know, we get stability from these institutions. They give us a feeling of structure in our lives. Like, our lives have meaning and count towards something. So when it all falls apart, it reminds you of how meaningless life actually is. Like, all these institutions are made up and run by people who are very imperfect, and that life actually doesn't make sense and can't be organized clearly and succinctly, and that nothing really matters, nothing lasts forever. Like, it's just this feeling of disillusionment. It's a lot of nihilism. And you know what would be a really interesting episode? And let me know if you would be interested in this. But as I was doing research on Gen X, I noticed a lot of trends and themes amongst Gen X and Gen Z. Like, just as a Gen Z reading all this, I'm like, that sounds like us. And history does repeat itself, but it's interesting to see. And maybe I can make a video at some other point in parallels amongst Gen X and Gen Z, because I feel like we have a lot in common, just culturally. And Gen Z is still pretty young, so we haven't entered the workforce that much. I don't know what types of work we're going to create in the world, but I'm excited to see what sorts of unique mark that we leave on the world, because our experience of growing up is very different from any other generation ever. And I talked about this in my very first episode. So if you're interested in that, then you can listen to that after this, if you haven't already. So going back to that whole latchkey kid thing, just imagine being a child and coming home to an empty house every single day. I'm sure that creates lots of feelings of loneliness, and a lot of Gen X who are latchkey kids do say that they have a very lonely child. Because while us Gen Z are very used to being antisocial, that wasn't the norm at the time. It wasn't normal for people to be spending so much time alone. And now we have technology we can distract ourselves with. But back in the day, all they had was TV, and that too, you had to watch whatever was on. If you can hear that, but my neighbor is doing some work in their backyard again, like they do every single day. So I apologize for the background noise. I'm just gonna have to talk through it, and hopefully they'll stop soon. Anyways, back to what I was saying about latchkey kids. So there's a lot of parental neglect, and not necessarily because their parents wanted to neglect them, but a lot of them had to work a lot of hours due to, like I mentioned earlier, the collapse of traditional family structures and the economic instability. And a lot of Gen Xers had to fend for themselves at a very young age, which led to all this self-reliance. And as I mentioned earlier, individualism was already becoming a big thing around this time, and this just contributed to that. Like, this feeling of I can only trust and rely on myself. No one else is going to take care of me, not even my own parents. So a lot of Gen Xers from a young age, they had to walk home from school on their own and let themselves in and make their own meals and make sure that they get their homework done on their own. And if your parents were busy working all the time, you had to kind of take care of yourself a lot. Seeing this political instability, it's like, oh, the government won't always be able to take care of me. And then all this family instability, it's like, oh, not even my parents will always be there to take care of me. I only have me. So there was instability going on in the home, such as divorce, and in the world, like politically and economically. And this led to a very apathetic and distrustful and skeptical generation. And Gen X is actually known as the whatever generation. Like, you ask, and this was a very common phrase in the 90s, like, you just ask a teenager something and they're like, whatever. Like, what do you like better? Whatever. Like, what do you want to do? Whatever. Like, they don't have any clear preference. And that's a kind of a direct result of just the general feeling of apathy that was going on in the time. Apathy basically comes from a feeling of, like, hopelessness. Like, nothing matters. I have no control over anything, so why even bother caring? Caring takes time and effort and energy, and it's an emotional investment. And if you don't feel like you're going to get that return, then you're not going to make that investment. Thus, the whatever generation was created. Many Gen Xers disapproved of the materialism and conformity and the traditional values of the previous generations. And this is a very common theme that you will see amongst Nirvana songs and a lot of other similar bands at the time. So like I said earlier, they were like disillusioned. Like, this illusion was shattered, and then they became disillusioned. Everything in America looked perfect on the outside in the 50s, but there were cracks starting to show now. There's trouble brewing underneath the pristine surface. And I just love to this idea, like, nothing that's perfect really exists, because even things that appear perfect have issues underlying this. So that leads to this sort of feeling of skepticism and cynicism that was very prevalent amongst the youth at the time. So this was like the general vibe that was going on at the time amongst Gen X growing up when they were coming of age, like their teens and 20s. So now, just picture it. There's this generation full of teens and 20-somethings feeling apathetic and nihilistic and disillusioned and alienated and rebellious. And then comes along this 24-year-old with messy hair covering his face and a loud voice and an even louder guitar. He's rebellious and apathetic and eccentric and chaotic. Basically everything Gen X would resonate with. This man, as you can probably predict, was Kurt Cobain. And even the music video as well there's the cheerleaders are wearing anarchy symbols on their uniform. And there's guitar smashing, which not only is rebellious because that's not really a social norm to just destroy instruments, but also it's symbolic of being against materialism. And then the lyrics of Smells Like Teen Spirit, which I analyzed more in depth in the previous episode, but there's themes about like dangers and gun and denial and rebellion and youth and just all these perfect themes that the kids needed to hear at the time. The lyrics were not completely sensical, and therefore represents this idea of going against tradition, norms, and structure. I analyzed the nonsensical nature of the lyrics in the previous episode, but it's like, what do a lot of the lyrics mean? Like, what's a mosquito, my libido? Like, it's not directly, it doesn't make direct sense when you listen to it. And so that goes against what was traditional. Before, lyrics had made a lot of direct sense. And, it didn't follow the norms. It lacked the traditional lyrical structure of songs that came before it. Like the idea of words being not about what they mean, but how they make you sound and feel. And that was Kurt Cobain's signature songwriting technique. It's not about the literal meaning of the words. It's about the vibe. It's all about the vibes. And this idea of the lyrics not being completely sensical kind of represents this idea of nihilism. Like, the lyrics don't make sense, and the lyrics have no meaning, and neither does life. So neither are worth taking seriously. And Kurt even says, people read too much into my lyrics. They're not that deep, and it also ties into this whole Gen X idea of like not wanting to show that you're trying too hard, Trying was not very cool at the time. And I think it's not cool for teenagers in general, of any generation, to show that they're trying too hard. Just this idea of like apathy, like nothing matters, like whatever. Also, the idea that the lyrics don't make sense as important is because like the older generation will listen to it and be like, what is this song? Like, what does it mean? What's the point of it? Like whenever older generations listen to the current generation's music, they always have to disparage it for some reason. Like the older generation never likes the younger generation's music. They always think it's stupid and meaningless and that their own generation's music is superior. And Gen Alpha is still too young to have their own music yet, but when they do, I'm sure a lot of us Gen Z are going to be trashing on it. But anyways, it ties into this teen rebellion idea of wanting to participate in something that your parents and that older generations can't understand. And it's loud, it's rebellious, it's angsty, it's just very different from the music that was being made at the time. And now, we're going to take another history break just to talk about what types of music was being made at the time. So a little music history break, and then we'll get back to talking about Gen X and Smells Like Teen Spirit. So, in the 80s, there's this whole big thing about like glam, hair metal type of rock, and like Guns N' Roses and Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, things like that. And the whole idea behind glam rock is all about showmanship and proving your masculinity. And it was very masculine, and all these themes in glam rock, which I'm going to go over, are the complete opposite of what you see in Nirvana's music, and just the complete opposite of what Kurt Cobain would preach all the time, because he was just so against all of these values due to the kind of upbringing he had. You can read about it in Heavier Than Heaven. It's like this podcast is sponsored by that book, because I've mentioned it and I think every episode, but just the type of upbringing he had made it so that he really hates toxic masculinity and that sort of like rigid way of living. So glam rock was all about showmanship, so showing off, and not just being showy with your outfits, but also with your technical proficiency and doing some really complicated, gnarly guitar riffs and solos to show off how skilled they were at the guitar. Whereas Kurt was very against that. And if you hear Nirvana songs, they're all very simple, very easy to play. The riffs, the chords, the solos. And I went over that in the previous episode where I talked about the musical components and how what makes a song so special is its simplicity. And that's what makes Nirvana's music in general so special. Like the solo is very simple. It just copies the tune of the original song itself. And a lot of Nirvana songs follow that format as well. There's also a large sexual component to it as well, which Kurt hated. Just showing off how manly and masculine and macho you are and how many women you sleep with and how rich you are. Just basically the exact opposite of everything Kurt Cobain stood for. The biography is really interesting to psychoanalyze him because when you read about his upbringing, it makes sense that he dislikes all these things. He basically wanted to do something that was the very opposite of that. So he didn't want to show off any technical proficiency, and he didn't really have any technical proficiency to begin with. He only took a month of guitar lessons when he was a teenager, then quit, and then taught himself everything just through experimentation and trial and error. And a lot of the songs, when he plays, he doesn't even play them correctly, in quotes. For example, he doesn't always mute his power chords. And even Smells Like Teen Spirit itself, the power chords are not muted, which is technically not how you're supposed to play a power chord, but if it sounds good, then is it wrong? The point of music is to sound good. You don't need to blindly follow every rule if it doesn't make sense for a specific scenario. And that's why Kurt Cobain is such an influential and important musician, because he broke down this idea of good music is not mutually exclusive with technical proficiency. And that's another theme I want to talk about in another episode. And he was also against this idea of not just showing off technical proficiency, but also showing off wealth and status and looks, musicianship. The name glam gives it a lot away. It's all about showing off. They would wear very flashy clothes, a lot of metallic-y sort of things, lots of leather, lots of dyed hair, piercings, just hey, look at me. If you see Kurt Cobain's garb, it's very standard, very traditional, something you'd wear to the post office, just something you'd wear on a normal day, ripped jeans and flannels and cardigans and t-shirts and sweaters and Converse. His outfits were very standard and often from the thrift store. And he would continue to buy clothes at the thrift store even after he became rich, which I think is really interesting. Nirvana is not about showing off masculinity. Again, like I said, they actively were against that. They actively hated on the whole alpha male thing, and they were very pro-feminism, and they didn't try to show off how manly they were. They didn't try to show off how much money they had, even though they had a lot after Nevermind blew up. And they never were into the whole groupie things and sleeping around a lot to try to prove your worth. They were all in committed relationships, and they wouldn't wear all this branded stuff. Their music doesn't brag about these sorts of things. Values wise, they were the antithesis of the kind of rock music that was made before them. And I haven't really included much of my own personal opinion, but I like glam rock in that I like the way it sounds. Like Guns N' Roses has good music, but from a values perspective, I'm with Kurt on this. I also don't agree with these sorts of values, even though the music is good. And I'm not against technical proficiency. I'm really impressed with complicated guitar solos, and I value them, but also I really like the idea that you don't need that in order to make good music. So while I like the music itself, I'm not super crazy about the values and the lifestyle that adhere to it, and I'm more in Nirvana's camp of values, which is why they're my favorite band, and they resonate with me so much, and I've talked about them in every episode I've had so far. They were not into the idea of showing off wealth, status, looks, musicianship, masculinity. And there's even this quote that Kurt Cobain said back in like 1989, before they were really famous. I think this is when they're on their Bleach tour, and this was, if not their first interview, then one of their very first interviews they've had. And the interviewer asks Kurt, like, what advice do you have for any aspiring musicians? Don't quote me on this, I'm just paraphrasing here. You can look up that interview if you want, but if you want the exact wording. But Kurt basically said, don't worry about the material ethics of music. Just make good music. It doesn't matter what you look like or what you have. And I love that idea because I feel like a lot of being a musician is also about being a celebrity and a brand. What sorts of things you wear, the car you drive, the house you own, the people you date, like the clothes you wear. A lot about music is the brand around it. And I like that Nirvana's lack of a brand kind of became a brand in itself, unintentionally. And I agree, like, I think music should be just about the music. I'm not super big into big showy things either. Just make good music, and it doesn't matter who you are or what you look like, how much money you have, how attractive you are, what sorts of subcultures you belong to. Like, just make good music that's authentic and that resonates with people and that resonates with yourself. So yeah, I really like this idea about not focusing on the material ethics, not just of music, but I think art in general. Well, glam rock was popular with a mainstream audience. Nirvana's kind of music was music for the underdog and the underrepresented, you know? People who grew up in poverty, people who've been bullied, people who've gone through mental illness, people who have aspects of them that are not as socially acceptable and thus have a harder time fitting into mainstream culture. This music is for them. And that's one of the many things I love about Nirvana as well. It was basically a rejection of mainstream culture and attitudes. And like I said earlier, the song does rebel in lots of ways, and it does go against mainstream and tradition, like the non-traditional lyrics and the very simple guitar, and the idea of just not showing off when it comes to status or opinion or people you associate with yourself. Nothing about the song or the music video or the performances or anything is about showing off. Like, even if you look at Nirvana's stage performances, they're not very flashy. They're just three dudes wearing normal clothes and jamming out. No special effects or anything crazy. At most, they'll have colorful lights or something, and that's it. But even the performance itself was not a performance, as in they weren't performing anything. It was just about the music. Nirvana was always just about the music. And that's why I and so many other people valued them at the time and value them still to this day. So yeah, Kurt Cobain was a true artist in that sense. It was just about the music, not the fame or the money or the admiration or the accolades or the awards. And then there's this whole other debate about, did Kurt want to be famous or not? Because Kurt had very conflicting feelings about fame. On one hand, he really wanted it, and on the other hand, he didn't want it at all. He was really complex like that. There are a lot of conflicting aspects of his being. So I think that would be interesting to analyze. But yeah, in general, he wasn't doing it for any of the superficial or external things. It was just about the music for him. Whereas glam rock had a big element of showing off. So yeah, this led to Gen X having a musical movement of their own, because they hadn't had that yet. Like, the Beatles had the baby boomers had the Beatles, which was huge. And this was the next big musical movement, the next mania. Just like how there was a Beatlemania, now there's a Nirvana mania. Has there been a mania since? Comment below. Following Nirvana mania, what was the next mania to come after that? Who was popular enough and who changed the game enough that there was a mania? Comment below. So yeah, everything about the song screamed rebellion, both metaphorically, both symbolically, and literally. He was screaming in the song. And it really resonated with Gen X, who was rejecting tradition and structure as a result of the type of upbringing they had. And due to this, alternative culture was big in the 90s. Not just music-wise. In the 90s, there was this whole big movement of alternative music, starting with Nirvana. Everything alternative became trendy. Like, even the fashion changed. And the fashion in the 90s had a lot more edge than it did before. Like alternative medicine was in, like people were into like holistic healing rather than traditional medicine. Just traditional ways of doing things were kind of turned on its head in the 90s amongst the Gen X who were young at the time. Just alternative culture as a whole became really in. Like whatever the mainstream is, we're gonna do something different, basically. Like whatever path and structures the previous generation sets from us, we don't trust it and we don't want it, and we'll just do our own thing. This amazing song exactly captured the vibe and the attitudes of Gen X at the time. So the combination of a lot of factors, like just the way that it deeply resonates with everything Gen X stands for, the way that it's just a good song, the way that it's so different from anything that preceded it, which gives it that element of novelty. You know, it doesn't blend in with the rest of the songs. It really stands out because it's unlike anything that's ever been done before. And whenever anything becomes hugely popular like that, there is usually an element of novelty, or else people have no reason to like really pay attention to it. And then obviously the heavy MTV rotation, again, being played every few hours for several months at a time, that's bound to get any song to be really popular. Like, you couldn't avoid it. You couldn't escape it. This song was everywhere in 1991 and 2. Weird Al Yankovic did a parody of this song. You know you've made it when Weird Al covers your song. And then in general, it's just a good song. Yes, mediocre songs blow up all the time, and I feel like it's happening more lately. But this is just a good song. It's fun to listen to. It makes you feel things. It gives you energy. It riles up a crowd. You want to dance or like headbang to it, or it has fun, catchy lyrics that you want to yell. Like this song just has a really special vibe and energy. Like, I'm always down to listen to it. It's not a song that I would skip if it ever came on, even though I've listened to it so many times in my life. It's a good song. It's a fun song. It's fun and angsty at the same time. Like, it has those light and dark aspects of it. It's pop, but with some edge, and it's edgy with some pop. Like, it perfectly balances the two worlds. It's offbeat enough that it attracts the alternative crowd, but it still is catchy enough that it attracts the mainstream crowd. And I talked about that in the previous episode. So all these factors combined led to this being the big, huge, revolutionary song that it was. If you were to make a list of the top 10 songs of the 90s, this song would probably be on the list. If you were to make a list of the top 10 rock songs of all time, this song would probably be on the list as well. You can't escape it. The song was so important and so crucial. It created a whole new culture. It showed that you don't need technical proficiency. It showed that energy and vibes matter more than literal meaning of the lyric. It gave Gen X something of their own. This was huge. It was the start of the grunge entering the mainstream. If you like rock music and if you like alternative music, a lot of rock and alternative music that's come since then was inspired by, if not Nirvana, then a band that was inspired by Nirvana. Alternative rock music would not be what it is today without this song. Anyways, does anyone else feel as strongly and as passionately for this song as I do? I mean, if you're listening up until now, that means you probably do, right? I know some people think it's overrated because people who are into alternative things tend to not like mainstream things. They want to show off how cool they are and different they are by hating on things that are popular. And since the song's popular, they want to hate on it. And Kurt Cobain even did the same thing. He totally disparaged the song afterwards. And the album too. But regardless of what you personally think about the song, or at least what you pretend to think about the song, you can't deny how unique and special and important it was at the time and still is. Like, you play the song at any party and people will know it. And it came out 33 years ago. That's no ordinary feat. People move on quickly. Things lose relevance quickly nowadays. So for something to stand the test of time is really meaningful, especially in this day and age when there's so much content and people have very short attention spans. What's interesting about this song is that you kind of know the meaning of the song, but you also kind of don't. Like, when you listen to it, from both the lyrics and the music, you can gather that it's like some angsty song about rebellion. But if someone were to ask you literally, like, what does this lyric mean, you probably wouldn't be able to tell them. But as a whole, you kind of get an idea of what it's supposed to convey. And I think it's really unique. The way that you don't literally know what it means, but you can still kind of pick up on the idea of it. It's a very subtle form of communication. It's really intuitive, and things that are intuitive resonate with people a lot more than things that are purely logical. Because we're creatures of emotion before we're creatures of logic. So you're going to prefer something that makes you feel good over something that'll make you think good things. It really walks that fine line between two opposing subcultures, which is really hard to do. It's really hard to make something that resonates with two opposite subcultures in a way that alienates neither of them. Like I said, this song achieves some pretty impressive feats. It's so real, it's so raw, it's so authentic, it's so unpretentious. It's not trying to be anything that it's not. It doesn't have an agenda, it just is what it is. Having repetitive lyrics helps because people can remember it easier and have more fun singing it. It's a good song for parties and events because it's loud and energetic. And it's good for when you're in a good mood and a bad mood. That's what's interesting about this song. It's like when I'm feeling just angsty, I listen to this song and I'm like, yeah, like nobody gets me. But then when I'm in a good mood, I'm like, yeah, this song is so fun. It walks a fine line between mainstream and alternative, but it also walks a fine line between positive and negative feelings as well. That's why this song is so special. I hope listening to this will give you a lot more appreciation for this song, because it does so much in just 5 minutes. It's catchy, there's novelty, and also just the idea of the weird lyrics. It gives people something to discuss, something for people to talk about. That's the whole premise of Weird Al's parody, is that no one understands what it means. And Kurt Cobain saw the parody and he loved it. He thought it was hilarious. Kurt Cobain himself and Nirvana themselves represented these new unique values. They themselves had a lot of novelty. There's no celebrity or public figure like Kurt Cobain ever. Like, there wasn't one before him, and there's been no one like him since him. He's so unique in his own thing, you know? Like, there's no such thing as, oh, this musician's the next Kurt Cobain. Like, there's no next Kurt Cobain. He's his own thing. No one can be him. He's so authentic and unique. So, in conclusion, this song is basically everything that would resonate with Gen X based on their upbringing. This song really resonated with those values and outlooks. It strikes a musical balance of punk and pop without compromising either. And again, I talk about the musical components in the previous episode if you haven't listened to that already. And it captures the vibe of like this rebellious, disaffected youth. It's nihilistic, it's angsty, yet it's also fun. It's just like, it's a historical time capsule, you know? This song perfectly represents this time period and this era and this generation. And while it resonates with people of lots of generations, like lots of millennials resonate with it, lots of Gen Z resonate with it, like myself, but it's still very unique to its time. Like, it's a product of its circumstances. It's a snapshot of history and culture. It was the start of a new era of music. This song was just a really good song that represented lots of really new values, that was just at the right place at the right time. And it contained attributes of two different worlds that otherwise wouldn't have much in common. And that's why Smells Like Teen Spirit is such an iconic song. So now, when you're done listening to this episode, I want you to go listen to it right now and appreciate it. Because if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably into alternative music, and you have this song to thank for that. So that's the end of this episode. I thank you for listening to me ramble on about Gen X and boomer history and music and Nirvana, but that's what this podcast is about. I'm interested in alternative culture and rock music, and I'm super interested in the 90s. And I love comparing generations with each other. And I'm always going to connect everything back to Nirvana. In fact, it would be interesting to see how many episodes in a row I talk about Nirvana. I'm sure I'll talk about it in the next episode. I don't even know what's in it. I haven't written it yet, but I'm sure I will. Because alternative music starts with Nirvana. Plus, it's my favorite band. Plus, it's the band I know most about, the band I know everything about. Anyways, so that was the end of this video, and I hope that you can value and appreciate the amazing, brilliant artistry of the song. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening, and I hope to talk to you next time.